Lets it fly. R-I-D-I-C-U-L-O-U-S. Ridiculous.
They're going to have to trade the run for the out. The throw over to third. Ball game.
Wow. The fifth year to try and put it away with an ace. That's a storybook ending.
Hello and welcome back for episode 39 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Last week, Juan Soto and the impending biggest MLB deal ever were a huge focus. I'm now delighted, sort of, to say he signed with the Mets, just as I suspected, and we'll, of course, take on the specifics of the contract and what it means for the team, the league, and the future of sports. The fantasy football playoffs are also upon us. I'll tell you what I'm going to do to give myself the best chance as I'm staring down some really good opposing lineups, and, of course, I'll remind you to have fun with it. When you get to that point of the year, sometimes that's all you can do. Let's go right into Fantasy Football Friday number 7 and talk playoffs. I did make the playoffs in both of my leagues. I was 11-3 and I got the 1 seed in a 10-person league. Then naturally, I only went 7-7 and got the 3 seed in an 8-person league with a much better team. All that matters is we're in. If I can do it without too many cliches or overly obvious kind of blathering, I'll do my best. But my number one rule, well, it throws me back to middle school or, well, any year in high school too, and I hope nobody can relate, but my number one tip is to dance with the guys that brought you there. If you had one particular lineup that crushed it in the regular season, one player that gave you those Sunday or Monday night miracles, or who would have a monster game every time you were in a tight matchup, you kind of have to keep playing them as long as their role on the team hasn't changed. I've been guilty of getting too absorbed in things like the exact corner and receiver matchups that would happen most often during the course of a game, or how a defense has done throughout the year at defending certain positions. So much so that I benched the only 2 relevant options in the Jets passing attack, obviously Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams last week, for Malik Neighbors and Bucky Irving with the Giants and Bucks. I still scored 136.3 in the 8-person league, but I played against Puka Nacua, and he put 42.8 on my head. The Jets were playing the Dolphins, who've been one of the best teams in the league against receivers for most of the year, and I knew that. But I went back to review the Dolphins' schedule after that game, and I realized that they've just played very few elite receivers on the year. Had I played both Jets options, I would have won that game, probably gotten the number 1 seed in that league, and had my highest scoring week of the year for that lineup. If you have a true ringer, somebody that you should be able to play every week, then just don't doubt them. In the biggest games, the stars kind of tend to shine a little bit brighter, and there are tons of tight playoff races making almost every NFL game have some implications right now with 4 weeks of the regular season left. My number 2 rule for winning in the playoffs is to play keep away. If you see a player on waivers that you aren't necessarily going to start on your team, but you would be concerned about playing against, especially if they have very good upcoming matchups, pick them up to just keep them off of somebody else's team. The last thing you want to do is lose in the playoffs and kick yourself because a pickup like that kind of torched you. I was actually just able to do this week with the Chargers' outstanding rookie receiver, Ladd McConkey. Will I play him over any of the other good options I have? Mike Evans, Malik Neighbors, Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson? Not a chance if I don't have to, but I think he could get hot as the Chargers get, really close to securing a playoff spot and need to win 1 or 2 more to get in. Now to tip number 3. I mentioned this right after I drafted, but you have to carry a good defense and kicker and be consistently looking for the best weekly matchups to use them. I'll split the explanations up on these 2 and look at kickers first. I've been preaching about the Cowboys kicker Brandon Aubrey for so long now. He's about as automatic as they come, and he has the chance to hit multiple 50-yarders every single week, even as the Dallas offense is playing with a ton of injuries and a backup quarterback. Chris Boswell, the Steelers legend, has been the number 1 scoring kicker most of the year. If you have him locked in like I do in the 8-person league, you're getting 12.5 points a game out of him. The numbers that matter when evaluating kickers and who you should play. Does the offense perform well on the opponent's side of the field? If they do too well and they score too many touchdowns, like for example, the Bills or Lions offenses, the top 2 scoring offensive teams, then they'll actually limit their kicker's production a little bit just because of all the touchdowns. Other factors to consider: how many field goal attempts per game does the guy tend to get? And of course, are they relatively accurate? The last consideration is sometimes worth it too. Are they playing in a dome or an open air stadium that week? And if they're playing outside, is the weather going to be okay or not? The caveat is that, well, Chris Boswell does play his home games outdoors and is one of, if not the best bad weather kickers ever. So I don't think you should let that one scare you too much, but everything else definitely holds. Now on to defense and special teams. Please don't run out a random defense in any given week and just hope. That is a really good way to get negative points. Remember the many different ways a defense can score you points too. You have sacks, interceptions, fumble recoveries, defensive and special teams touchdowns, safeties, blocked kicks, and limiting yards and points. You only have to do a few of those things well in order to have a very good week, let's say 10 plus points. Most of the year in both of my leagues, I've been able to alternate between the number 1 and the number 2 scoring defenses, the Broncos and the Vikings. Unsurprisingly, they're also first and second in the league in sacks, and they really do pretty well in just about every metric. The best part is I can typically drop one of them to waivers for a week when they have a bad matchup, then pick them right back up the next week. For example, the Broncos defense plays 2 divisional games against the Chiefs. Broncos have been awesome, but I would never start them in those games. I feel the reason why I'm able to pick them back up is it mostly comes down to other people not taking defenses that seriously or assuming it doesn't matter. If you get, let's say, a dozen apiece from your defense and your kicker just by making a pretty smart on-paper decision about who to play, then you have this little buffer for if one of your top skill positions busts, way under their projection or gets injured, or both like I had with Bucky Irving last week. If I had to add on a mini fourth point, it would be remember that in just about all leagues I'm aware of, playoffs are 2-week cumulative point affairs. If you have a not-so-great first week, you're pretty likely to have some players bounce back and score better the next week. And if you had a huge breakout game from someone once, it's not super likely to happen again. In the end, watch tons of good football or watch bad football with the intent of cheering on your team. If you have one of those diamond-in-the-rough kind of players like Chuba Hubbard on the Panthers or Brock Bowers on the Raiders. I might do another Fantasy Football Friday each week of the playoffs, just looking for some possible waiver wire value or talking about the best matchups of the week. So if you need to know more about how to win and really want that chip, stay tuned. The first game that'll contribute to the fantasy football playoff scoring was this Thursday night's game with the Rams and 49ers. I managed to play against Puka Nacua in both leagues, and he was probably the only player I would call fantasy relevant in this absolute disaster of a quote-unquote football game. It was a 12-6 final. The Rams essentially knocked the Niners out of the playoff hunt in the pouring rain in one of the sloppiest games of the entire year. I did have Cooper Kupp in one lineup, who for only the second time in an 8-year career didn't have a single catch and zeroed. I also had Jawan Jennings, the Niners' conceivably number 1-ish receiver, who had 2 catches for 31 yards on 10 targets. So it's safe to say I'm going to be down massively heading into week 2 of the first round in that league. Kind of planning, well, maybe I'll get third at best because I don't think I have any chance in that first and second matchup. I'm sure everybody on both offenses will bounce back a little bit next week, but if you had any Niners or Rams, you're almost definitely in trouble here for the first round. Good luck, and again, just have fun with it. Now, of course, on to the aforementioned biggest contract in the history of sports. I have never been so enthralled in baseball news in the month of December as I am this year. There's just typically not so much of it, and it's not nearly as juicy. But have you heard about any of the major deals from just this week? Obviously, to do the situation justice and to put a bow on the entire Juan Soto spectacle, let's talk about the details of the deal. He is the first guy ever to get 15 years on a single deal, and he now has the richest contract in the history of pro sports at about $765 million, with some caveats. I thought the max was going to be $750, and that's kind of what the chatter in the media was, that nobody was going to go over that number. As if it's not just splitting hairs when it comes to such an already ridiculous number, but that glass ceiling has been shattered. Steve Cohen, the Mets' probably psychotic owner, has shelled out most of $1 billion to a single player who has never won an MVP. Of course, I think the signing makes sense on the basis of strictly winning more baseball games. With any contract that runs this long, though, the team has to have a way out of it if the player can't keep producing late into their 30s. Almost no one in baseball ever does that, so what's with the obsession right now over increasingly longer and longer contracts? When somebody says they want to be a member of one organization for life, I often tend to believe that they mean it, Derek Jeter style. But financially speaking, it's way, way better to continue negotiating deals every few years after roughly the age of 30. Then the team can show its loyalty to the player, meet some of their demands, but still only have to pay them what they're worth at the time, not what they were worth at their absolute most expensive, like Soto right now. The Mets have just made all of their other decisions for the rest of the offseason a lot harder, not easier. They didn't quite make it to the World Series, even with the momentum that they had from beating the Phillies. Still, they took the Dodgers to 6 in the League Championship Series. I mentioned before how daunting their free agent list is right now. It kind of reads like this. JD Martinez is relegated to designated hitting nowadays, but he's always been a reliable bat, and he's one of the more accomplished offensive players that's still around. 331 home runs and over 1,000 RBIs in his career. Pete Alonso has hit 226 homers in his first 6 years. He has almost indescribable power. They have 3 average or above starting pitchers in Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana, and Luis Severino. Well, at least they had 3 until last week. Severino already signed with the Athletics. The Mets have a decision to make on over half of their roster right now, and I think you have to expect at least half of those to leave. This might be the number 1 team with the most turnover from 2024 to 2025. They're going to look incredibly different when they take the field in the spring. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just going to be so stressful for them the whole offseason because they've already locked up so much of their future in Juan Soto, no matter what the return might be. What does the deal mean for the league and for sports in general, though? I sincerely hope that 15 years doesn't become any kind of standard length. The odds of any athlete ever being good, let alone great, for 15 total years in their career is essentially 0. The odds of that same athlete, though, being good for 15 consecutive years after already having played essentially 7 years in the bigs, depending on how you count that 60-game 2020 season, are literally 0. It cannot be done. I think it's impossible. And so the ugly truth comes out again. You have to win a championship with the player that you signed to that mega deal pretty soon after you sign them. And you better hope everyone is so enamored by that, just that one winning of a championship, as to ignore how much the player falls off in the last, several or 10 years of the deal, what have you. A 41-year-old, like Soto would be at the end of the deal, and a 26-year-old like he is right now, do not have the same ceiling for production ever. Even Patrick Mahomes, who has the biggest NFL contract ever, he's only going to be tied to the Chiefs through age 36 in 2031. Will he continue to play beyond that point? I'd say probably. But if you claim to know that right now, I would find it really, really curious. Do I think he'll still be good by then? Yes, it's Patrick Mahomes. But again, you need an out. The team needs a way to escape it. As impractical as all these mega deals are for the team, and as much as they're completely about just catering to a player in whatever they want, there is an option. Let's talk about opt-out clauses. These are pretty tricky, and like many other nuanced little things, I won't tell you I understand them perfectly. What I can tell you is Soto has one after the 5th year of this deal. I believe that means he could use it starting right after the World Series in 2029 when free agency starts. Unsurprisingly, the money in the contract isn't linearly given out for the exact reason of regression that I talked about. The first 5 years are going to pay out $61 million a year, which quote-unquote shrinks to $46 million for the final 10 years. The Mets can avoid that opt-out clause that's written into the contract by increasing the salary that he would be getting in, again, the final 10 years of the deal by a little bit. Instead of 46 mil, they would owe him 55 million a year, and then he would be unable to enter free agency again. So the total value of the deal at that point would go over 800 million. You see, money in sports isn't actually real. It doesn't mean anything. It's all monopoly money. Reasons why a player would choose to opt out. The team hasn't been as successful as it should have been on paper. That certainly happens. Think, well, Aaron Rodgers with the Jets. Maybe the player would just like to be a free agent and go through that whole courtship process again to feel appreciated, or maybe the team just hasn't fulfilled some of the promises that they made in the original deal. That happens from time to time as well. Some of the reports around the provisions in Juan Soto's contract: his family's going to get a suite in-city field in New York for free, presumably. He also gets 4 premium seats. I think that's in addition to the suite, to just kind of stick anybody he wants in there and have great seats. And presumably it's for any game that he wants. That's wild on a dollar value basis when you think about it. How much would these people that Soto's bringing around and his family and everything, how much would they have to pay just out of pocket if the Mets weren't giving it to him? I don't want to know. Other rumors are that the Yankees, Soto's now former team, used to make even star players have to pay dearly for their suites and to get their families in and things. Yet the Mets had to get their man by any means necessary, and, well, it worked. We'll zoom out on the sports world now even a little bit further. Contract increases at the top of the market have to outpace inflation for players to even kind of bat an eye. Everyone wants to know what all of the records are for the total money in the contract and the average annual value and signing bonus and things, and they just all have to one-up each other because they're petty or something. I don't know. I hope deals reach a maximum length, and I personally hope that it's nothing longer than 15 years because I already think that does not make any sense at all. Even 10 years is a unbelievable risk. And I think that that should be the max ever offered to anybody who is, I'll say, 25 or older. It probably won't be the maximum length per se, but I think it should be. Even this Soto deal is completely unreasonable in almost every way, no matter how amazing Soto could be on the field. Again, no matter if he brings you World Series rings, multiple, no matter if he wins MVP, you name it, I don't think it could possibly be worth the price tag. So after all of this and any other money the Mets have to spend, I don't want to hear a single excuse for them. They better be going to and winning multiple World Series over the course of this contract so that they can prove to the rest of the sports world it wasn't as insane as it looks. So happy to put the Juan Soto saga to bed for now. And next week, I will be very happy to go through a bunch of the other monster trades and signings that might affect actual wins and losses on the baseball field a lot more than him. The MLB winter meetings will be done by then, and the feeding frenzy will be on for quite a while. Again, stay tuned. On a personal note, I'm going to the Lions-Bills game this Sunday, and hopefully everyone has that circled as a big game of the year candidate. The point total on it right now is at 53.5 at time of recording, but I wouldn't be surprised if it went way over that with how hot both offenses are and how many big plays they've both given up recently on defense. I've been to a few games at Ford Field before, but never a game nearly this hyped. Do I think it's a Super Bowl preview? Not necessarily, but I will say it's the matchup I would most like to see. Unfortunately, I still have a feeling that the Chiefs will just find their way through the AFC somehow again. As a Josh Allen fantasy manager, I am absolutely always starting him no matter who the matchup is. So I guess the number one thing I want to see is, well, the Lions win in a super high scoring game like what the Bills and Rams just played last Sunday. Josh was the first quarterback all time in the regular season with 3 passing touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns in a game, and unsurprisingly set the record for most fantasy points by a quarterback in a game. I hope that locks up the MVP for him, but I'm not convinced yet, and I'm actually still leaning toward Joe Burrow. I think Lamar Jackson might arguably be out of the race, especially if the Ravens start fading. Now, they play the Giants on Sunday, and that game will probably be one of the biggest blowouts of the year, but time will tell. It does have the largest spread, again, as of right now, of any game so far. I heard the Ravens are something like a 16-point favorite. NFL honors predictions coming as well. There you just got the preview of what I'm feeling for MVP, but I've kept you long enough for now. As always, whatever else catches my eye is always on the table. Feel free to hit me on my socials if you have an idea for me. Leave a like, comment, share, all the good things. This has been episode 39 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
Field, lets it fly. RIDICULOUS. Ridiculous.
They're going to have to trade the run for the out to throw over to third. Ball game.
The fifth year to try and put it away with an ace. That's a storybook ending.